Okay, hello everybody. My name is Nicole Locklear with Design Lab. I am responsible for talent partnerships and career services here. And thank you for joining us today. This is our inaugural Meet the Team webinar. We've got a lot of questions from people on, I understand UX design now, I'm on my way, but who else do we work with once we get a job? And so today we have with us Matt Shaw, who is the head of engineering at Design Lab, and Patrick Multani, who is our product designer and also a mentor. So some of you may already know him. And we're going to be talking about just sort of the partnership between design and dev. What do they do? How do they do it? Sort of answering questions as we go. And then if you have any questions, feel free to put them into the questions tab over on the right. I'll be monitoring that. We're going to have like a guided conversation to start, but then we'll get to some of your questions at the end. So we're kind of ticking up here in attendance. Maybe we'll wait a couple minutes just to see if anybody else joins. I think we had almost 700 people sign up for this, so we'll see how it goes. Let's see. We have people from all over the globe here. Istanbul, Toronto, Dublin, New York, Chicago. Yes, this is going to be recorded, so we will go onto our YouTube channel. If you have to leave for any reason, if you want to revisit this, if you have questions, if you want to send it to other people, so it will go on there after. Okay, I think we can just kind of start here. We've got about an hour. As people go, again, this will be on YouTube. If you missed the beginning, you can always check it out later. So first off, let's begin with Matt. Matt, why don't you tell us a little about yourself, how you found yourself in the world of dev and engineering, and then what you do here at Design Lab.
Sure. So I actually started my career as a designer who knew how to code. And over the years, my roles became more and more technical. But I always found myself working on projects that required some visual creativity. So I've been on both sides of the process, either as a designer communicating a design to a developer or as a developer trying to implement designer's vision. Here at Design Lab, I'm head of engineering, where I leave the designing to the experts, and I make sure that the technical aspects of our platform are doing their best to empower our students. And a big part of that is collaborating with our product team and designers who plan new features and updates to our platform.
And how long have you been at Design Lab?
A little over a year.
Okay, cool. And then same question to Patrick, kind of how did you get into design? What was sort of your interest in that? And then what do you do here at Design Lab?
Yeah, great question. I got into design via, I was in middle school interested in doing something creative, and then design was something I was interested in. So I first kind of studied graphic design, and then went from there into product design, industrial product design. Didn't like that so much, and then went into concept design. And then around the time when the iPhone launched, I was getting a lot into this user interface and interaction design. I went then on to I studied in the Netherlands, and then went on to work there as well. And then around 6 years actually ago, I saw on Twitter a post from Design Lab looking for mentors, and applied. Started first with mentorship, and then slowly got into part-time design and then full-time design. And I'm still doing mentorship now, but mostly design. And I'm collaborating with Matt and other people from development team and product team. So I'm working on the interaction design, visual design part. So
cool. Thank you for the introductions. So we'll jump into sort of broad questions first that we've prepared, that we kind of see most often in your surveys and just things that we're reading. So the first one is, now that we have an idea of what you do individually, can you talk about how as a team you work together? Thinking about a project from scratch, are you working side by side constantly? Are you handing things off? Is it a little bit of both? Tell us, a little bit about what that process might look like, and then, what tools do you use for your communication? How do you keep track of things? And I think, let's start with Patrick this time.
Okay, yeah. So in terms of like the flow, we're like starting with like generating ideas, or like first, like as you said, like identifying like the problems, like what are we working on, what kind of like feedback do we get from people, and then from there like formulate like new feature ideas, and then we're like trying to get like development like in like as soon as possible, and like, trying to like make it even sooner, so that like we make sure we get like all the constraints set right, and that we're like actually we're coming up with ideas that would actually later also work. And we had like a lot of different processes, and like at the moment we're also like prototyping like a new process, but essentially we like come up with ideas, and then like sketch going from low fidelity into high fidelity, and then bringing in like development and developing it, making it real. And then maybe like Matt can kind of like take over from there. Like.
Yeah, sure. So I'd like to like just state like why do designers and developers need to work together at all. So when a designer designs something, you don't want to approach it like, here's my beautiful design that I worked on for 3 weeks. Here's the Figma link. I hope you enjoy it. You want to approach it more like, here's a sketch of what I'm proposing. Can we render a button this way? Can this be done within the time frame or the budget? So the earlier that conversation starts, the more smoothly the project will go. So even before you open Sketch or Figma or Illustrator, you should be working on like a brief. What are the goals? What are the challenges? New features, data requirements. That's also part of the design process, right? So stakeholders can check in and say, hey, this concept looks great. Let's move forward with the design. Or it looks like you are planning some reports here. Let's talk about what data we have or that we don't have for those reports. Or even like, why are you designing this at all? We don't need to do that. It's not a company goal or something. So in an ideal situation, all the teams concerned would be communicating throughout the process, not just design and dev, but also anyone else involved. Like in Design Lab's case, we have a curriculum team. So if we're going to change lessons or redesign how curriculum works, we'd want to talk to them as well. So overall, the more you talk and communicate, the smoother it goes. The worst case scenario is you design something off on your own and then you toss it over to the dev team and just expect them to perfectly implement it in like a week or a short amount of time. So like Patrick said, we stay in touch from the beginning of when Pat or design team is sketching something out. He's asking, is this approach going to work? Can we do this within what's available on the Design Lab platform, et cetera? And so I think just talk as much as you can, be in touch throughout the whole process. And even after the design's handed off to the dev team, it goes both ways. We want to make sure that we're implementing it the way that you envisioned as a designer, and that we're not assuming anything or leaving anything out.
Yeah, those are great answers. And I mean, I think the takeaway here is that communication early is key for anything that we're trying to accomplish. Just leads to a better product at the end of the process. I'm kind of reading through the questions here as we go. I know we're going to answer them at the end, but a few of them are relevant to what we're talking about. So in terms of like this process, what are like the key tools that you both use? How do they come together? How do you manage that? And then, there is one question that I think people have asked before is, if a developer or if a designer is handing off a Figma file, what does the developer do with it? What kind of happens to that? What does that look like? And I guess, Matt, let's start with you this time.
That process varies a lot depending on the project or the technology or where the company's at. In terms of, some companies have design systems. So someone could hand you a Figma file and, the first thing you want to say is, does this design use all the components we have available in our design system? Is something new being invented here that we can't do, or it's going to add 2 weeks at the timeline because we need to implement it? So from the dev team's perspective, it's about like, what's it going to take to do this? Do we have the technology available? Do we have the time available to do it? Can the browser support it? Can the phone support it? That kind of thing.
And then I guess, Patrick, from a designer perspective, what have you seen that, you can do to make sure that anything that you're creating can be actually created by the developer? Is there anything that like you're using as you go to sort of checks and balances, or is it simply just, keep that conversation going, keep those check-ins consistent?
Yeah, like I also see like some question around like the tools and Figma and so on. So like we're using Figma. Like we switched like maybe like 3 years ago now to using Figma. And as like Matt said, like a design system is like helping a lot in making sure that everybody is aligned and avoiding like creating something which already exists again and then it's slightly different, and we create this new component which we don't need, and then like developers ask like, oh, should we use now this component or the other one? So we're basically trying to make sure we're like organized. So we use kind of like the team library feature in Figma, and people can comment on the designs. Like what I'm like doubling down a lot on this year was like making everything super tidy, like making sure when like having a file ready to taken into development that like all the task flows are laid out. So think about like maybe there's like a login and then like, oh, like user logs in, like what are the steps, what are the screens for it, what is other like useful information that like the other people need to know, and then doing it that way. Like Figma essentially doesn't really like have so many features for that handoff process, but I think they're like developing it better, and it's like now possible to see all the properties and so on. So that's great. But like around the whole, I guess there's like the design, right? And like a good design essentially like speaks for itself, but then still you need like some like information, like where does a file start? If you have like, I don't know, like 50 screens, like where does it start? Like how is it laid out? So a lot of like communication just around the design is like necessary to improve that. Yeah, does that answer kind of like roughly the question?
Okay, that's helpful. And I do, I think I should have framed this at the outset. So this conversation between designers and developers is, very specific to Design Lab first, but then also the size of our organization. So some of the questions are asking about, freelancing in much larger organizations or libraries and things that we just maybe don't do here. So today will be more about a smaller sort of product-oriented company like Design Lab, as opposed to a really large global, 1,000-person plus, engineering and design team. Hopefully we'll have those sort of conversations next year. We're going to keep this going. But just to get back to some of the questions over here, I guess this is a good one for both Matt and Patrick. Are there things, again, not to pit you against each other, are there things as a designer that a developer does that are just annoying or irksome? And are there things as a developer that a designer can do? Not saying here in this instance, but in past instances where, if it's something that they knew about beforehand, hopefully we can avoid it next time. I guess I'll start with Matt.
Well, yeah, so about pitting us against each other, I would say that it can feel that way when you're working with a developer as a designer or vice versa. I think that you have to remember you're part of the same team working towards the same goal, and you're not adversaries. So, and I'll speak to the designers since that's what everyone's here for. Even though I'm on the development side, I think the earlier that you get the developers involved, obviously the better. That's what we keep saying. But not just from a process perspective, but from a morale perspective. If they feel like they've been involved and they're committed to the project and they understand the decisions, they know why the project's happening, they'll want to succeed as well, as opposed to just saying, here's the thing, please go do it, and they don't understand why, or maybe they don't think it's needed. So that's one thing I'd say. The other thing is that as a developer, I think designers might make decisions about things that can't be done, and obviously they're not doing that on purpose. There's just maybe a gap in knowledge about what's available, or maybe they're proposing something that was available in a previous project, and in this project it's not for some reason. So as a designer, I would say don't be afraid to ask questions and just be honest if you don't understand something or you need more information. I think developers hold a lot of esoteric, weird knowledge, but they're actually pretty excited to share it and help with people. So, of course, there are some grumpy stereotypes about developers, but I think that's the minority. If you do find a developer that's pushing back, I would just say, like, ask for evidence. Why can't we do this? Or is there another way we could do something simpler? Just ask for more detail. Sometimes you'll find that they actually had maybe a mental block that was stopping them from figuring it out, and you push them to actually find a way to do the thing you wanted to do. So yeah, that's my advice.
And I guess, Patrick, kind of similar question, but, as a designer, are there, 3 things that you would suggest, you could do with a developer to start your relationship off on the right foot, something to that kind of area?
Yeah, I think, so I think like goes back to like organization, but like being like very like organized and essentially like treating the design as if it's like some present that you like give, right? Like making sure that like everything is like organized and tidy, and then also like having what like Matt says, like open communication. So being like, oh, like if there are any questions, let me know, and then also being open for changes. I think maybe that goes back to kind of like what the other question, kind of like what could be like a negative way, but it's like actually like a good way. So like developers oftentimes just have like better ideas than designers, I think, and that's just because there's like so much more insight and so much more like thinking through how that actually works on the technology side. And sometimes these ideas can make even like are not even more delightful, but like they save like time and they save resources. So as designers, we might think we have the best idea, but then actually we don't. So like staying humble around that and being just clear that like developers hold like amazing knowledge. So.
Okay. I do see another question up there that we were going to address a little bit later. Does a designer need to know how to code? And I think, again, there's multiple answers to this. Maybe, keeping in mind who Design Lab is and the size that we are and kind of how we work. Is it something that we would say, as somebody who's graduating Design Lab, you need to start learning how to do this? Is it something where it really depends on what you want to do or where you want to go? Sort of what are your thoughts around designers learning how to code? Let's start with Patrick.
It's a very loaded question, but I like it. So I would say it depends. Kind of, I guess design or like code in the end is like similar to design. It's like a tool or like a way to achieve something. So I would say if people are curious, then definitely like look into it. And if it feels like, oh, like it's not fun, then I would also not advise doing that, because then you'll probably not learn much. But I do think it's kind of, or like my recommendation when looking into it is kind of like starting as soon as possible to typing out things and making very small things, which are just like very fun exercises. And I think can definitely help to be able to like better understand what is going on, and definitely can improve like the like conversation with developers. But I think in most jobs it's not really necessary, even though it like gets listed as bonus. But think about it that like in order, or like development is like a huge field, right? And like in order to do that well, you need to spend lots and lots of hours in practice. And like it's almost impossible to do both design and development like to a degree where you can make sure when like developing something on payments that like the user's payment information are secure, right? Like you don't want to kind of like start like learning development and then creating a website and then like, it's all wonky and breaks. So I would say try to like phrase it, like see like what code could be used for, what could it be useful for you, and then dive in and get started like typing things out as soon as possible. And then it can be useful, I think.
And Matt, do you have any thoughts on that from a developer point of view?
It can be helpful to speak the same language when talking about what's possible. I think if you're interested in it, then you should pursue it. I wouldn't pursue trying to learn some coding if it's painful or you hate it or it's too tedious. But I think like if you're designing for the browser, it's definitely helpful to understand CSS and what it can do and its capabilities along with HTML. But yeah, like Pat said, I think it gets asked about on job applications more than it is actually important for designers. If they're asking you that on a job application, maybe they're trying to get you to do multiple roles. But I think in practice, it's good to be aware of what the capabilities are of the platform you're targeting. But I don't think that you need to go do it as a coding boot camp or anything like that.
Yeah. You know, it kind of reminds me of, you know, as a user experience designer, you're doing research. So if it's important for what you're doing, absolutely, you should probably try and learn a little bit about it. But do you need to be an expert in it to apply to a job? Again, like Matt said, if they're putting that in the job description and making it really prominent, maybe they actually need 2 people, and you know they haven't really decided what the weight is on either role. But I think broadly here at Design Lab too, you know, that's not something that we teach. Sure, we will you know, talk to it, but that's not like in our expertise, again, because there's so many different takes on what is needed in UX. I guess another question that we kind of see here is more of like a business and a brief question. So, and again, this may be different in Design Lab versus a larger organization. Are designers or developers involved in creating a brief for a project? Kind of how does that happen? Do you know, what kind of say do you have in that? You know, again, in an ideal situation, is there like a perspective where you'd say, we think, you know, this is the best way forward for that? I guess Patrick first and then Matt.
Yeah, like we're like currently going like more and more into like getting like development, like say into the brief and design and product, and like basically like getting a lot of people in there without like creating chaos and kind of like too many cooks in the kitchen. Just to make sure that like from the beginning we set like good constraints, and like ideas are fun and it's like fun to design and create all kinds of things. But then if, you know, like if that takes like twice as long for the project to develop and like most of the things are not possible, then like nobody gets really happy at the end. So there's like this like fine balance where like you're like designers happy, like creating ideas, and development and like product, everyone else is happy, kind of like knowing like which direction to go and having that defined. So yeah, so like we're trying to get like more people like early in as possible. So like yeah, we started doing this kind of like this year more and more.
Yeah, and then I guess Matt, like, are you or would you ideally be involved in like a brief of a project from the start, even if, you know, your part isn't necessarily coming for X weeks or you know, amount of time?
Yeah, definitely. And like Patrick said, we're improving that process at Design Lab internally. You know, we're coming up with briefs about, you know, what's the problem we're solving, why are we solving it, like what are the metrics that are indicating that we should solve it or we should spend time solving it, and then what are possible solutions. So from a development perspective, it's always the question of like, can we do that? What's the time frame? When are you expecting it? You know, you don't want to design something like, let's do some chat room where 500 people can join at once and video stream and all that, and then you talk to the dev team after you've designed this beautiful application, and you're like, we can take 6 months to build that, and it's going to cost this much money to have these servers. You know, you realize this whole project isn't even doable. So it's just you know, back to the same thing about communicating as early as possible to flag things that may affect the project. Make sure these things are possible. Make sure it's reaching a company's objective. You know, why are we doing it? What are we fixing? What are we solving? Yeah, so I think there's a lot more work that's not done inside of Figma or Sketch or Illustrator around planning and communicating. You know, it's not just about whether things look nice and just popping out a design.
Back to communication. So I guess, this question again is maybe about your experience before Design Lab, because we have a couple people asking similar things. Say that you are a new product designer at a company X. How do you get up to speed with their libraries and their systems and their tools? I think Matt, you definitely had your own, business before this, and Patrick, I think you freelanced before. So how do you as a designer figure out how things are going on or what's going on? And again, I think it depends on the organization, how organized they might be, but maybe some tips and tricks for how students who are going into their first or second job can ask the right questions, or what they might experience. And I guess Patrick, you can go first.
Yeah, I'm like thinking of two different things. Like one is making sure to like building like a network of like different like experienced designers, so like a lot like more experienced designers, and then like keeping in touch of like how they do things, because I think like especially in the last few years there have been a lot of changes to software and a lot of like talk around like design systems, and like while where I think like development has like things figured out like much better around these like problems, design is a bit like lagging behind, right? So like we're like now starting to have like actually the tools which support like more robust design systems, but there's still like a lot of challenges. But essentially like, yeah, like seeing like what are other people in other companies doing, how are they doing things, and so that's like one thing. And the other thing is, I would say, so the question is really around like starting at a new company and then learning their system, right? So like I guess like first like figuring out if they actually have like a design system, and if there is none, then like creating one as soon as possible in like collaboration with like development. And like before even starting, what could be an idea is to look into existing design systems. There are like now more and more systems which are like openly accessible, like like IBM, Microsoft, Uber, Lyft, so on. Like they all have like their like design systems open as like and like Shopify as like pages, so you can actually like look at like the documentation, look at what kind of like components they have, and then already like start designing things with it. And then it probably gets easier to do that same thing at a new company, because in the end, I think the metaphor, so like the methodology is like the same in all companies, right? It's this idea of having like very small elements and then they make up larger elements, and having like colors and type and all these like very small items well defined, and then just making compositions out of those. Yeah, so in a sense, we're like we have a good time now, right? Like a lot of things are like free and easy to use, so it's a great time.
And then Matt, I guess as a developer, when you're going into new situations, are there instances where they're using something you've never seen, or it's it's something that you have to figure out? And again, I think to Patrick's conversation too, tying it into interviewing, like these are questions you should ask during the interview too. Sort of, how do you onboard new designers is a very valid question that teams would probably be able to, give you the answer for, or give you some sort of direction. But yeah, Matt, your thoughts?
Yeah, I agree with Pat. One of the first things you want to ask is, do you have a design system or any system, or even a style guide or component library, some sort of spec of reusable things to build with? And designers coming into this nowadays, Pat's right, like it's becoming much more organized in recent years. Design systems are becoming more and more common. I think that still you're going to come across a lot of projects where there's no design system and it's just sort of like you have to wing it. And maybe you propose a design system, or you propose an existing framework that's out there to at least start with. But from a development perspective, we love the design systems because that's for our benefit as well. So when we're building out your design, we can use components we already have. We know that they work, they've been tested, and we know what they look like, and we can just stick them in the page or wherever it's being rendered. And pretty much design and development can be on the same page, no pun intended, about what it's going to do and what it's going to look like. So when I would have come onto a new project, it's like there's just always a ramp up about what do you have going on now? What are the technologies? What are the systems you're using? And it's just hopefully they have documentation. If they don't, you really need to try your best to get it out of them or make them create it, because otherwise it's sort of the Wild West and you're designing blind, and you definitely need a framework to work within.
Okay, great. I think there's a couple other questions about more of like the design side of things. So one of them is saying like, if you see all these, we tell you to go to Dribbble, we tell you to go to Behance to look at portfolios, to do your own portfolio, which is super important. From a developer standpoint, some of the things that you see out there in the world, I guess, what are ones that are just, as a developer, you're saying, I can't create that, or yeah, I need more help to figure out how you want to do this. It looks great. It looks wonderful. But again, maybe it wasn't something that was done with a developer. Do you ever have you ever encountered that in the past? And then how do you manage that relationship with the designer to say like, all right, here's what we can do. Let's figure this out. I guess this is, a question more for Matt.
Yeah, that actually happens less than it used to because of kind of standardization of UI on the web. There used to be things where people would just invent these crazy interfaces where there's like a little circle in the bottom right and you click that, and that's like this menu that folds out like a tree or something. And that stuff doesn't really happen anymore. So luckily, most of the things that are coming up where you're saying we can't really do that have to do with, I guess, data and how things work together, like a user story, a flow. How do they go through the app and how does it work and how do they interact? Which are actually, those are harder problems because those things don't come out necessarily in a design when you're just looking at it. So it's another reason to communicate during the design process, because you could have this design that looks great. Developers think, yep, we have all the components for that. That looks easy to build. There's nothing here that's bad. But then how does it actually work in practice? How do you click here and go from there? And what kind of data is used? You might find out later on that you can't do it that way. So in that regard, and less of a designing way, but more of a UX way, the communication is even more important.
Okay, there we go. Back to communication again. Getting back to like the tools conversation. I guess as a company we use Slack. Many companies do now. Are there any new tools or systems or technology that you are both excited about, either individually or as something that we can use to collaborate here, or more in like a product design environment? Patrick, you're first.
Yeah, I'm on one hand very excited about like the changes that like go into Figma in the last few months. So these like improved like auto layout and variants, and I think in January they launched interactive components. So all of that helps a lot in creating like better things. So I'd like now, for example, it's a very challenging to just have like or like not challenging, but it's kind of like cumbersome to have like a hover state in a prototype. So like those kind of things which you would expect like they have figured out, or like that would like work very easily in design software like that. That's not the case, but like they're working on that. So I'm excited like what Figma is doing at the moment. I'm also, I guess it goes a little bit back to kind of the code conversation, like also quite excited about like React. So yeah, like all these essentially the code frameworks which like function more like design software, where you have like components and you can compose these, like that's really exciting to me as well. And like software that is like built around that. So.
And then, Matt, same question. Tools or new technology that you're excited about, personally or for Design Lab?
Yeah, I think, like Pat said, Figma is great because it communicates a lot of information that the developers need. So something like older tools like Photoshop and Illustrator don't, they give you the visual of what something's supposed to look like, but it doesn't tell you any of the technical details of how to actually implement it, where Figma is getting closer and closer to how exactly should this design look and be rendered in a browser. one of the things that we've been playing around with is Tailwind, which is a CSS framework, and can be basically the backbone of a design system. It makes a whole bunch of decisions for you that you don't have to worry about making, like common font sizes and padding and grids and all that type of stuff that, you could spend months making your own design system and making all these decisions about what the best font sizes are and the best color palette. So I think Tailwind and other similar CSS frameworks allow designers to work within a framework that's already been based on like standards and research, and then the developers don't have to write a whole library to implement a design system because there's this common one that's already been used out there. So internally here at Design Lab, between Figma and Tailwind, I think we have a nice setup going with the design and development teams.
I see some questions in the chat of, Adobe versus Sketch versus Figma and how we decide what we use. I don't know the answer to that, as not being a designer myself. Kind of from your experience, like, are there instances where one would be better than the other? What was the thinking behind why we use Figma or moved on to that? I guess, Patrick, you first, and then Matt.
Yeah, I think like I remember like when Figma like kind of like launched, and when they had kind of like this like first video, which was like they had like a certain style, right, and like a certain vision, and that was essentially like we're like creating only software and make only decisions where like multiple people can collaborate online. And so essentially like a Google Docs for designers, right? And that was great because like what we did before was like using Sketch, and then that's very cumbersome, or like that was back then. I think it like improved a bit more, but it was cumbersome to like move around files, and then like when one person has opened a file and then a different person is in there and makes a change, then you mess things up. So then we looked a bit into Abstract, used that as version control, but that had like a lot of functionality which we didn't use, and it was another tool there. So essentially like, we also used like InVision. I remember that too, and that was like challenging. So essentially like Figma is just this like nice like one platform, and it like offers a lot of different features which are helpful. And I think we got we got like locked in, or like we got like excited around the whole like online browser just sharing a link and like online commenting. That was so purely like the collaborative things, and then that they're now adding so many useful features around styles and layout and so on. That's just a bonus, right? I think like all the tools are like doing that now, but I guess the other tools are not so good with the collaboration part. So
yeah, and Matt, if you have any additional thoughts.
I go back to the collaboration and communication. I think Figma specifically, I'm going to talk about that because we use it. It's geared towards UI and UX design, whereas some older tools aren't meant for that. So it just supports different states of UI. It better communicates some of the technical aspects. You can copy something in Figma and get CSS properties out of it. You can also comment directly on a certain part of a design, which is super helpful. And it's all online, so it's like Google Docs where everyone can look at it at the same time. It just it just takes out a lot of friction for the communication and collaborating of designs. Whereas, if you're using something that's a desktop app and you have to mail around files, it can really become pretty tedious.
Kind of piggybacking onto the technology and things that are new, where do you guys go for inspiration, in either the work for Design Lab or in figuring out like what's going to be next? Are there kind of your top 3 websites or blogs or people you follow? Any suggestions for this group to start doing their own work? I guess Matt and then Patrick.
That's a tough one. I think there's information overload. So I think at first, when you're first getting into a new skill, you want to like read the top 200 blogs or Twitter feeds, and I think it's really overwhelming and can just bring your brain in a different 100 different directions. So personally, I'll read probably two different, like from a technical standpoint, different like technical feeds, and I just figure if something's important enough, it'll bubble up in one of those. Like I don't need to go hunt around scouring all the different places to find the best new thing. And especially from a technical side, I think this also does apply to design. The newest, shiniest thing is not good because you don't know if it's going to be around next week or next month. And that means if it goes away, no one else is using it, no one's supporting it, it's not getting updates and all that. So yeah, I like to kind of to limit the information and just take in what makes its way to me. I figure if it makes its way to me, then it's important.
Patrick, same question. Where do you go for inspiration? Are there any suggestions you have for this group who are kind of just starting out here?
Yeah, like I do have a Dribbble account, but I'm not really on Dribbble much, purely because I don't know. I guess it's a bit like a museum, right, where you see like some pretty pictures, but usually like that really is not so helpful in like the design tasks at hand. So well, I am on there from time to time, but then usually I find it very challenging to find actual like great ideas there. But what I do like is like looking at like larger companies, and then if they have like a design system website online. So yeah, what we mentioned earlier, like IBM has like Carbon design system, and like GitHub, Shopify. I mean, like all these like large companies, right? They have like these like public pages, which are like documentation for their design systems. And I do like looking at those and how they develop. Also like human interface guidelines and material design from Google, from Apple and Google. So those are very inspiring. There's like a site which is called Site Inspire, which I also like. There are different ones which have like websites, portfolios. And then one website which is also pretty cool, not really design only focused, but called Product Hunt, that like lists like the like latest like products and features and design related things and so on. It's a bit like a Google for tech, I would say. So that's been helpful. And I do like books, right? Because it's like a little bit like longer form, and you don't see only like pretty pictures, but you actually see kind of like the theory behind it and the knowledge. So I like A Book Apart books and Rosenfeld Media. So like design related books I also like for inspiration.
Okay. Thank you for that. We will, again, Patrick, if you have time, somebody's asked in the chat if you could list out what you just said, so Product Hunt and any of the other ones that we can go visit. Oh, okay. We have some people on it. Great. I guess in this last like 15 minutes or so, we've answered questions as we've gone, so that's, I think, a little bit of a shift from what we were going to start out doing. But in terms of, if we move into interviewing, if we have designers who are going to interview with developers for the first time for any amount of time, if you kind of get to these team interview stage where, you might have a product manager and a developer and a senior designer, are there any questions that, they should ask a developer if given the opportunity, that could either help the developer figure out if the designer might be a fit for the team, or just questions that, as a designer, Patrick, you think that they should ask? I guess let's start with Matt.
That's a tough one. I guess from a designer's perspective, you'd want to know, is this dev team easy to work with? So maybe start off by asking, do you have component library? How do you build stuff? What do you build your backend with? When you work with designers, what's the process? See what they think the process is from their perspective. You could probably get a lot of information just by hearing how they think about it. You could probably also get information about the design side of the company as well. So I think that's hard. I think typically if I'm speaking to a designer as a developer in an interview, it's more of a cultural thing. Like, do we get along? Do we kind of have the same goals? Do we have the same values? Do we want to, achieve the same stuff? So it's a little less straightforward, and it's a little more amorphous than, you know, if I'm interviewing a developer or if a designer's interviewing a designer. But yeah, I would say ask them what their process is like and how they like working with designers.
Good answer. And then Pat, I guess, as a designer, like what questions would you ask a developer in an interview if given the opportunity?
Yeah, I think I would be. I mean, I have a bit of like I'm like curious about like technical things, right? So of a technical nature. So I would ask about like technical things, like what kind of like technology is used, and also around like past projects, which or like the most exciting projects that the developer or like developers have worked on, and then like how that went for like for them and like for the designers who worked on that. So like just getting an idea of how they're working, what their processes are like. And I think that's also nice because I guess on one hand, like when not knowing like development, right? Like it can seem like this like unknown, like what's happening, like there's some like colored like letters on the screen, but then like actually being interested in like what, you know, how does it work and like what are we using, and like just like listening and like soaking it all in, like I think can like help us as designers, but then also like make sure to build like trust with the developer. So not being like, oh, like it's this thing which I never understand, but like more being like open-minded and curious and just like asking that. And also like I did ask in the past kind of like developers for like advice on like how to learn to code, or like what could be useful for designers to know on code. And then you get different answers. So I feel like the whole like developer community, developers are like very friendly, collaborative, and like happy to help out, right? Because we also have to understand that development is very challenging, and like they all went through kind of like the learning process. And like once like you go through that kind of process, then obviously like you want to help other people and don't be like, oh, like you should feel the same pain in the end, right? So I quite like developers and how open and nice they are. So
Okay, good answers again. I guess speaking to a few of the questions here of working as either a contractor or working with teams who are in different countries. And I will say we do this at Design Lab. So Patrick, right now you're in Germany and Matt is in upstate New York, I believe. So we have distributed workforce here. Are there any tips and tricks on how to bridge that maybe cultural differences or time differences? You know, again, maybe speaking to how you two work here and how you've made that work. I guess Matt, for you first.
I think the tools that you use can go a long way in terms of being distant and working different time zones and different hours. So like we mentioned, Figma, you know, if we were all in an office, maybe Figma wouldn't matter as much, or Slack wouldn't matter as much. So I think tools that help you communicate and organize conversation. Organize, like an emphasis on the organize. So you can have a lot of conversations in Slack or an email, then you have no idea where they are after the fact, or you're wondering when did we discuss that that new dashboard, and you can't find any notes. So I think being very organized, having a process written down about how the whole company approaches this stuff, so that when somebody needs information, they know where to find it. Specifically between designers and developers like Pat and I think, you know, everything we talked about is just even more important when working remotely and working in different time zones.
Pat, any tips or tricks?
Yeah, like well, I tend to work kind of like in the mornings and then in the evenings again, so just to like accommodate the time zone difference. I do think it's important that there's like overlap, like when being like a distributed team and like online, where like both or where like most people are online and like reachable. Yeah, well, I guess yesterday, like late in the evening, there was like a question from like a developer, and then I was glad that I was online and could like answer that, because sometimes these things are like very timely and they like unblock, right? So I guess this whole like communication and like putting your best foot forward can go a long way, but then there are like always things which are like more like timely, or like simply something that like got forgotten, and then being online or at the same time can help like resolve that. It would have not been like bad if I would have not replied like almost instantly, right? But just yeah, so like using something like Slack, being online at the same time can help a lot. And then when being in different time zones, like seeing if there can be some way to like change the work schedule, so not having kind of like a 9 to 5, but something else where yeah, both can be online at the same time.
Yeah, I just want to add quickly a friendly reminder that you can always have a phone call or video chat, which is, it's easy to forget when you have all these tools that allow you to send messages around. So even when you're remote, sometimes it's just quicker to jump on the phone.
Yeah. I mean, I think I hear again the communication theme, and then also, to this point, the whole company should be sort of thinking about how they are going to communicate. It's not just the designer and the developer that need to figure out, what hours they can work, and then having that conversation early. So when it does come up that somebody needs somebody on an off hour, how do you go about that? There's a process in place, and there's sort of, that everybody is aware where it is. And so it doesn't come to that moment of, panic where, how am I supposed to get hold of this person?
Yeah, like one thing which I'm kind of like also like thinking of now is like, which can be helpful, is like for design, we have like these like, which we talked about, like components and styles, right? Like color typography. What can also be useful is like when starting at a new job, or like just in like general when already working somewhere, is to create templates for things that I want, like communication. So something like a checklist, like like when design is like finished, right? Like what kind of things should be accomplished, and like maybe like something like conversation starters, and those things can go a long way of just being essentially creating templates, and then you don't have to think about it, right? You almost go kind of like, I want these things into autopilot, so then like, okay, we're like at this point in the process, now we need this template. I just fill it out, send it over, and then that's done. So yeah, I guess like design goes beyond like visual interaction design. Like a lot can happen in just like text templates. So
okay, I think we have time for one more question here. And I think the last one will be, again, now that we are starting jobs remotely, pretty much everybody, no matter where they are at the moment, is kind of in this strange moment of needing to do that. Again, Design Lab itself, we are all remote, and the company always has been. So is there any advice that you would give to students, when they do get that first job in the next, week, month, whatever that might be, who are starting remotely? How might they, kind of start those relationships when you can't be face to face? Matt, if you have any advice, and then Patrick.
Don't be shy. Take initiative to set up a call with all your teammates at some point. If it's a huge company, obviously you'll have to limit that, but yeah, just set some time aside to talk to other people in the company, not necessarily about your specific department or role, but just kind of meet them and see what they're up to and what they've done in the past. I think working remotely, it takes a lot of not effort, but like you have to be deliberate about keeping those relationships and keeping the team kind of feeling connected, because it's very easy for everybody to go off into their corners and do work for a whole week and not talk to each other. So I think if you're joining a new company and you're remote, don't be shy about taking that initiative if you don't see it happening. I think it would be appreciated.
Patrick?
Yeah, I agree to that, like as well. And I guess like some like with this like remote, like what could also be ideas, or like what we're also kind of like doing is like something like having like scheduling like happy hours, like to celebrate like a launch, or like coffee chats, or just having like a weekly call, like set up at the same time for like half an hour, and then be like, okay, we talk everything that comes up, like we can talk about. If we have nothing to talk about, then we don't need to have that meeting, but just kind of like scheduling in things, and then also like some things which are like fun, which mimic kind of like offline life, that can be great to like foster these relationships.
Yeah, and I mean, again, I think this is a great interview question. So you can ask, your teams, I'll be starting remotely. How has that, how have other people felt that? How have other new employees, like, do you have any processes in place for helping me be successful in my role, since we are going to be remote? I think that those are all valid questions to ask. Okay, so we're kind of at the end of time here. Thank you so much for everybody for joining us. Like I said, this will be on our YouTube channel if you ever want to revisit. Hopefully we will be doing more of these in the new year with teams of different sizes, with people from different companies. It's just very convenient to start with our own team. So I don't know, Matt or Patrick, if you have anything else to add here. Now is your chance.
Good luck, and designers can be best friends with developers. Don't be afraid. We're very nice.
Yeah, I guess I'm like seeing like a question here like around like accessibility and how important that is. I guess like think about, I guess that goes back to kind of like increasing the value of like being a designer, right? So I think like code, web accessibility, animation, like all these things can definitely like elevate like a designer. But then just like make sure to do these things, learn these things when you're like really like passionate about it. But like accessibility, like we like really like double down on that. So increase like font sizes, like have like accessible colors and so on. So I think that's a great investment, and keeping an eye on like what like large companies are doing, because I think like as we see in the audience here, like a lot of people are wondering around these things and want to improve design, and so want like big companies. So keeping an eye out like on the conventions and what's happening. Yeah, and happy designing, right? In the end, it's like fun. It's supposed to be fun. So like development is fun too.
Okay. Well, thank you again, everybody, for joining us. Have a happy holiday. And thanks a lot. Bye.